Okay. அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். Thank you for joining another MNM Nanbargal event. This time we spoke about education, how important education is, how education should change, transform itself to accommodate the 21st century needs. And then we heard from Dr. Punraj last week on the vision that Dr. Abdul Kalam, our ex-president, had for our country, and what were the misses, the gaps, and addressing the gaps today. It's all okay to have the grand schemes, grand visions, but then the implementation, that's where the rubber hits the road. And there is a huge gap. As we can see in India and in Tamil Nadu in particular, there have been a lot of grand schemes announced, but then it never came to fruition because of the way they were implemented, because of the people that manage the implementation of things, because they didn't involve the stakeholders, or they didn't have the right people, they didn't have the right objectives set out, and so on. And that brings us to our guest today, Mr. Antonio Nieto-Rodriguez. He is a world-renowned project management guru, and he is one of the top thinkers, the 50 top thinkers in the world. He is in the group of Michael Porter and so on. And he has written a lot of articles. He has published books. And he is like the person that brings everything together on the project front. And he is also part of the Strategy Implementation Institute. And there is more to Antonio. And he is a joy to hear. He's got lots of ideas that he's going to share. His experience is so vast. He has worked with top multinational companies, and he has worked with top skills across Europe, across Asia, across North America. So it'll be my pleasure to introduce Antonio here. And I am very glad I've interacted with him on the professional side, and then to interact with him on the socio-political platform like ours. It's really something different. And I really look forward to listening to him as well. So Antonio, without much further ado, I give the floor to you for you to tell us how to implement projects in a government space, in the public sector. Over to you, Antonio.
Thank you, Kanan. Thank you for the invitation. I know how much you are doing to promote good practices. So I was glad to accept this discussion, and I'm very interested in politics and how to solve the current leadership issues that we see, especially in politics, in many countries. Also in my country, in Spain, we're struggling to find good politicians. So I have put together a few slides to set the scene and introduce some examples, and then I'm happy to have some Q&A around implementation and projects. So I think you've introduced myself. I'm working with Harvard on the next project management handbook to be published next year. I want to introduce the concept of the project economy, meaning that what we're going to experience is a huge amount of project. Only in infrastructure is expected to be more than 57 trillion on infrastructure projects by 2030. This is McKinsey. Also, us as individuals, what you see, the type of work is moving from operational work to project-based work. So we are all project managers and will become more even so in the future. If you look at an organization 100 years ago, you would have maybe 95% of the employees working in operational tasks, in supply chain, in production chains, in administrative work. Today, that figure has drastically diminished. More than 50% in normal circumstances today will be on project-based work. But with the introduction of artificial intelligence, robots, and now with the COVID crisis, we're seeing more and bigger shifts. So operations is being really reduced to the minimum. We don't need people in operations, maybe one or two, just to check that the robots and the machines are working. But the rest of the work is project based. So we're going to see more and more and more projects, to the point that I don't know if you're familiar in India with the concept of job descriptions. This is something that has been used for 40, 50 years in every public organization or private company, are about to disappear. People will not use job descriptions. They will assign you a job in a role in a project, and after the project is over, you'll have another project role somewhere else. So there's a massive disruption happening in the work environment. The future of work is project based. However, we see a huge increase in the amount of projects, but the performance is not great. About half of the projects failed. In public sector, probably more. By failing, meaning staying on budget, delivering the benefits. So there needs to be something done in terms of project management. I talk about that extensively in my keynotes and webinars, and about reinventing project management. My past book, Project Revolution, is about that, and with Harvard, I'm working on the next. But we need to get better in delivering, like Canan was saying, projects. We cannot fail 2 out of 3 projects. We cannot fail so much. We're destroying value every second. And this is not just dollars, euros, but it's also welfare and benefits for society. So that's one of the challenges and the biggest task for us as leaders in the space of projects to do better. I'm sure you're familiar with some of these projects in India. Demonetization in 2016 was one of the biggest economic reforms, but it did fail to achieve any of the stated objectives. So if we focus on India, you do have some massive projects, but there's an issue in the implementation, in the formulation, in the scoping. This one also can share with me, Make in India. Very ambitious. I think I have no doubt that some of the projects that you have in India are ambitious, but are they understood? Are they implementable? Are they, uh, are they real? And can people contribute to them? I will share with you some characteristics of that. Big infrastructure projects you have in India, like very few countries. And still, from my research, it still seems that they're not being able to deliver. They're mostly delayed. Will take years to be finished. So there's a lot to be done in terms of better implementation. I think one of the related questions that I ask leaders, I'll ask individuals too. When was the last time you were highly motivated and proud to belong to your country? When was the last time that you were motivated and proud to be Indian and of your country? It will most likely be related to a project that you supported, that you were happy with. So leaders should think always, political parties, of having that 1 or 2 or 3 projects will make the population proud of being Indian, to be respected and show the world that we're great. It happens often when you look at Olympic Games, for example. People are proud to host London, we're proud, or Sochi in Russia, very proud. These are moments where people are, we're happy to be part of them. They are a success. So I like to ask you afterwards in the discussion, when was the last time you were highly motivated and proud to be Indian, belonging to India, and what was it precisely? And that will give you a good insight of what you need next for India to be great. Give me some examples where we felt proud in Europe. It was in 2002 when we felt there was a massive project to make Europe big and important and relevant. And that was when they introduced the euro. We 350 people, not as much as in India, but we felt brothers and sisters. We felt like together we can be powerful. We can influence the world. We can compete against the US and China. So that project, one of the most complex projects ever happened in the world, because it was 13 different countries, 13 different languages, 13 different currencies. In one point, they switched to the euro. Everybody in Europe knew the conversion rate. You didn't need to be a college degree. People in the streets, in the coffees, they knew their conversion rate between the euro and the local currency. So the engagement, it was sold like a great idea, like a great project that would benefit everyone. Later on, things changed, and I think we can talk about that if you want, but the project itself, the conversion to the euro, was one of the most amazing projects I've ever seen. You could look into Singapore. Singapore are constantly developing these big visions, but they provide the means to make it happen. Singapore wants to be the world's first smart nation. Why is not India? You have much more technical people and technology than Singapore. Why is not India the world's first smart nation? And providing the means. So this is a great example, and I'm sure Singapore will deliver. They have one of the most efficient governments and public sector I've seen in the world. So lots of things to copy from them. Another great example of a project that influenced a city and a country was Curitiba. It's a country, it's a city which was just transit city between different cities going to Brasilia, the biggest, the capital of Brazil, and they decided, let's make something big in this city. And they decided to become the greenest city in South America. So that was a very ambitious plan, removing lots of cars, improving the public sector transport, a lot of green spaces. That was a transformational project of about 20 years. But today, you can find in Brazil one of the greenest city in the world. There was a leader with a vision. It was not easy. Some people will always complain, but the vision was very, very strong. This is a bit more practical public project, but I like it a lot because in Sweden, they were driving the car in the left. I think in India, you do that too. And they say, we need to adjust with Europe because they were having a lot of accidents when Swedes were moving to Norway, and there's no border. It was a mess. There were accidents. They would go into Europe. It was a mess. So they decided, let's move. So they organized a massive project. During the night of the 3rd of September, 1967, they made the switch. Imagine, the whole country switched. They painted, repainted, re-signed, and in one night, the project was executed marvelously. So another great example. This is one which I love. It touches me all the time because we're in a world where we're being split apart by many politicians. It's either them or us. It's a bit confrontational, very confrontational. You see that in the US, in the UK, in Spain, in Brazil. I'm a big fan of football. I think it's a bit like cricket for you. And in football, I'm passionate about Real Madrid. And I would hate Barcelona. I would happy. So what politicians have made is that we are feeling a bit like football teams now in politics. In the past, if a politician will not do good, then you just vote to another party, and that's it. Now people are stuck with their parties, and so this is something they've done very well, but is very bad for society. So an amazing project, which you can always think about, is the reconciliation of Rwanda. Rwanda suffered one of the major genocides. In just 3 months, almost 1 million people dead. Brothers and sisters killing themselves. They had been living together, but they were pushed to the extremes, which could happen the way things are going. And yeah, kill each other, people living together in the same towns, and terrible, terrible. After these terrible events, the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, said, we need to stop that. We need to start thinking as one country. We need to stop killing each other. We are the same nation. We come from the same origins. Let's stop this. So they launched an initiative, a project, massive project, more than 20, 30 years they've been working to reconcile the Hutus and the Tutsis. They had to ask for forgiveness. There were trials. They created new cities, putting them together. It was a very, one of the most painful process from a human perspective that you can ever imagine. Today, last year, they checked with them, how do you feel? Are we reconciled? Do you feel like one nation? You forget the past? About 94% of the Rwandan people said yes, we are one nation. One of the biggest problems in Rwanda was corruption, which I'm sure you have that in India. Corruption is a nice word, we all hate it, but it's embedded so deeply in politics in different ways around the world, but is part of politics, unfortunately. We will find very few countries where there's no corruptions, maybe Scandinavia, Canada, maybe Singapore. Rwanda was one of the most corrupted countries in the world. And one of the goals of this program was let's reduce corruption. If we are corrupted, we'll never move forward. We'll never move as a nation. What did they do? This is a nice idea that you can think about. They say, okay, if we want to eliminate corruption, let's involve the whole citizens, all the citizens of Rwanda. Not just the politicians or the new party. Let's involve everybody. So what did they say is, everybody in Rwanda, you people, you need to be clean at home. You should not litter on the streets. If you keep your house clean and shining and you take care of them, if you take care of your city and your streets, that will be reflected in society. What you see in the picture is not Switzerland. It's Kigali, the capital of Africa, one of the cleanest cities, not just in Africa, in the world. You don't see a paper on the street. It's all clean. And guess what? That was reflected on corruption. The power of the public and the people converted into a much less corrupted country. So they move down from the place 83rd in the world on corruption to the 49th. This is part of, I think now they were one of the most corrupted in Africa. Now they're just behind South Africa and one more country. So amazing. Rwanda has the highest rate of women in parliament. 56% of the seats in parliament are women. Amazing. More than many countries in the Western world. So this is a way to look at projects that I've developed. It's called the Project Canvas, and it allows us to look at all the elements. If we think about why are we doing the project, it's what we call the rationale and the purpose of the project. If we have that, if that's strong, it will help the project to be successful. Executive sponsor. So who's in charge? Who's the ultimate accountable? Is the president of the country? Is that person committed, really believes on the project, dedicating time? Then that project will be successful. You need to lead by example. You have all these elements here. Happy to share the slides, but it's an important tool that I developed to allow for guessing. One last example, and then I'm almost finished. Of course, when you look at memorable projects, you will always see the one of landing on the moon as one of the top ones. But I want to tell you a small story about that, not the one that we all know. So um, there was this kind of battle to be the first country to put the first man on space, and Russian and USA, they were fighting to be the first one. And at one point, uh, they were about to launch both USA and Russia were at the same time, 1961, about to launch the first one. Russia came first, just for a few weeks, and Yuri Gagarin was the first man on space. A few weeks after, we're talking here about May 25, 1961, the president of the US, John F. Kennedy, says we're going to be the first country to put the first man on the moon by the end of the 60s. When we talk about implementation of projects, it's very important to have a deadline, ambitious deadline. If John F. Kennedy would have not said by the end of the 60s, we would have not been in the moon yet. Correct? So he was smart enough to put that pressure. Okay, we have 9 years, but by the end of the 60s, you cannot imagine the pressure that meant into the people working on the project, but also the country and the citizens and the world. We wanted to know if they were ready or not. And I know India is working on their project as well on the moon and so on, which is great. But let me tell you this story. 1967, a group of journalists, they go to the NASA to check, are we going to make this project or not? Because we don't hear anything. We've seen a project, a few launches which failed, so we're worried. And they went to the NASA. They spent one day interviewing people there in Houston, and they talked to the chairman and the VP and all the people. The BBC was there, CNN was there. All the major press were spending the whole day to get an idea if they would make the project. At the end of the day, they go through a computer lab towards the end, and they see the guy that you see here on the picture like that, and they asked, can you tell us your name? My name is Michael Smith. I'm from Mexico. And what are you doing here, Michael? Well, I'm helping to put the first man on the moon. That's what the guy answered to the people of the press. I'm helping to put the first man on the moon. He was cleaning the floor. But he was convinced that by cleaning the floor, he was helping the scientific people to come the next day and together make the project happen. So he really, truly felt that he was part of the project by cleaning and helping. So when was the last time you felt that you were contributing, whatever you were doing, but to contribute to such an amazing project? Very important point. So there's very few ways of working and collaborating more motivating and inspiring than being part of a project with an ambitious goal, a higher purpose, and a fixed deadline. This is what I tell leaders, also politicals. Think about that. When I talk to European leaders, I say, when was the last time you launched a motivating project, an ambition project for Europe? It was 2002. This is 20 years ago. What are you doing in your jobs, guys and girls? You need to inspire, you need to make us proud. And you're not doing, you're just a bunch of bureaucratics. So what are important characteristics of a project like this? It has to be a strong purpose. It's about the why. It's not about the business case or return on investment. It's about, we want to show the world, we want to develop the vaccine for COVID. We want to do something that is remarkable and that people will be proud of it. So it's having a very strong purpose for the project. It's asking yourself 6, 7 times, why are we doing this? And when you have a strong purpose, then you have a fixed, ambitious, measurable deadline. So projects, they need to have a strong deadline that keeps the pressure. It has to be ambitious, realistic as well. Will not be in Mars in 1 week. It will take years, but there isn't a goal, 2030, and we want to be there. You need to put great people in projects. If you put just the people who are available, it doesn't work. Who are the most committed people in projects are the ones who volunteer. Who want to work on this amazing project? The people who say, I want, are already committing themselves. If you say you have to work in this project, that person will fake it most of the time. Maybe don't like it. Maybe he will just go 9 to 5 work, and that's not what you want. In your truly big, ambitious projects for India, you need to have good people and volunteers. And the dedication is very important. Yeah, you can work 1 hour per week or 5 hours per week. That doesn't help me. The best projects always have 100% dedication. And then you need to recognize the people. I think most of the projects, big ones, fail because people don't find a role. You've all heard about the United Nations goals. Yeah, they're super nice and we all want to be part, but how can we contribute? They're not accessible. This is one thing that you need to think always. How can you let the people in the cities or support? Remember Rwanda, it was, you are clean, you help to clean the cities, and that will react on corruption. So if a project is very nice, but it's just limited to a few people, that doesn't impact the same way. And last but not least, we need involvement of the senior leaders, the senior politicians. They need to be present. Steve Jobs, when they launched the first iPhone, was spending 2 days per week on the development of the iPhone. He was on the daily stand-ups. He was designing the phone with the teams. So you want people dedicated to those projects. You want them to see how they're doing, supporting the teams, taking decisions. If the leaders are just launching and being there in the picture the first day and then never showing back, that doesn't work. Okay, so if you are a business leader, you need to think, what is the project that will transform my organization and generate enthusiasm in employees? So leaders, if they want to turn around their business, it will be through a project, something ambitious that will motivate you. When was the last time you were motivated at work? If you ever were. Like you feel like going to work and I want to, it's because there was an ambitious goal and a project behind. The same for the public sector. What is the project that will regenerate our society, that will create prosperity, increase the well-being of all? This is what leaders should be asking themselves. That's the most important question that we should be asking our leaders. And with that, thank you very much for listening.
Muchas gracias, Antonio.
De nada.
Bueno, Kanan?
Yeah, thank you, Antonio. That was fantastic. As usual, like, you hit upon the high notes on what's lacking and how things should be. Now I hand over to Satish to facilitate the question and answer session. Satish, please go ahead. There are a few questions.
Thank you very much. Encantado conocerlo, Antonio. Muy gusto. Thank you. So let me start by answering one of your questions, Antonio, which is, you asked us when was the last time we felt proud about something that our country did. I want to give a couple of points on that and then probably take it from there. India actually failed, and I remember at that point feeling very proud. And the failure was when India tried to launch a probe to the south pole of the moon. India was only the fourth country in the world to try to do that. We couldn't launch it successfully. It failed at the last possible hurdle at the landing. And many things emerged for us at that time. India is one of the world powers in space program. India is right now planning a probe to Mars, and it's costing us less money to send that probe to Mars than it actually costed Hollywood to make a movie about Mars. I think Matt Damon acted in that movie as a space kind of a movie. I don't remember the name of it. That's one thing. Swachh Bharat is India has in the last few years, 10 years or so, built 1 million plus toilets for the really poor and downtrodden in the country. So India as a country is moving. Of course, a European point of view is limited. I understand that, but I do want to answer that question before we begin. That's from my perspective. There are many questions here. First of all, I would say thank you very, very much. It was great. I loved the story about NASA and the janitor who feels part of the project. I'm sure all of us here are very thankful for your kind presentation. I want to start with a question from Mr. Balamurugan in Chennai. In one of your slides, you had mentioned about the who, what, where, and the why. You spoke about purpose. Can you detail a little bit more on that? Because resources are limited and government's priorities are conflicted many of the times. How can a government decide on what are the important projects, who should be a part of it, and why should that project be done?
Thank you, Satish, for the introduction and the I love the example that you gave. Doesn't mean that the project needs to be successful to be proud. So there is the journey and build up, which makes us proud as well. So sure, there will be a second and third try, and then, but that's a great comment. In terms of the elements of a project and the question of where do we put our limited resources, I think it should be based on a thorough prioritization done by the leaders of the country. So meaning, what is our vision? What's our goal? How do we see India in 2030 or 2040 or 2050? If that's not clear, then you will not be able to develop proper plans and projects behind. I'm not sure how much India has developed that vision. I can tell you in Spain, we don't have that. Politicians just think 1 or 2 months down the line. If you go to Singapore, they're already working on the 2050 vision. You saw the smart country, for example, Saudi Arabia 2030, everybody knows. So I think if you miss that long-term vision, it's going to be difficult to prioritize projects. You still can have 1 or 2 or 3 key projects for I think the ones I show, especially making India, sound like quite strong brand and an interesting concept, but it didn't work as foreseen. I guess there were not enough resources dedicated or attention. So I want to say that before I drill into the details of the project. First, I think it's about the why of the project. Project management tends to focus more on the how. How are we going to make this and by when? But we forget to ask the why. The why will make sure that we understand that there's an opportunity or there's a problem that we want to solve. For you guys that are quite savvy into the management, you can hear Simon Sinek famous talk around start with the why. The same for projects. It's not about filling holes or making infrastructure for the sake of infrastructure. Is why do we want to develop state-of-the-art infrastructure? What's the real to facilitate transportation, mobility, all these things? It's always start with the why and not so much the return on investment. Especially in public sector, is more return on the people, return on society, return on sustainability. This is what matters most. So this is the why. First, the why. Then I will not start thinking about how you want to implement if you don't know who's going to lead the project. It's about the who is responsible. If the project fails, who's accountable for it? Usually it should be the senior leaders. The project team is supporting that leadership to change, to create, to transform, to evolve. So very important, the governance and the accountability. The third is the how, when, and what is basic engineering, basic project management. Is what are we going to do, by when, and how? Yeah. And then the third and last element is how important is this project? Is strong priority? It's a top 3 project in the country or the region, or is a below the line, not so relevant? Projects which are top priority will have stronger attention, more resources. So this is, in a nutshell, a very simple framework to have a first assessment, a good understanding between the stakeholders of what we want to achieve. Of course, afterwards, you need to do the bottom-up exercise, the detailed plans, the resources that you need to find, and so on. But I hope I answered the question. It's a bit long, but starting with the vision for the country, from there we'll define the top priorities.
Absolutely, and it makes a lot of sense. It's really motivating the way you put it as well. It doesn't narrow the focus of just the mechanics of it, but you actually prescribe a way where the governments and the leaders set up a vision for the country, vision for the society, and everything sort of starts to fall in place. Of course, that doesn't mean it doesn't have to be managed. But you mentioned a very interesting point there, Antonio, which is about not just the return on investment, but the social good that accrues because of the project, right? And Sendhir Ramanathan from London, he has a question. I'll first tell you the question and give you a little bit of context. I presume what he's talking about. He says how to make projects profitable for society as well as politicians. I suppose what he means is, I think you know what we're talking about. So please, so how to make a project profitable for society as well as for politicians?
Question, yes. I think it's hard to say that projects have to be profitable for politicians. For me, projects have to be carried out for the society, for maybe some sectors, from regions. But politicians, they're just temporary people who administer the public resources to create the highest value. So I don't think politicians should benefit from projects. If they do a good job and there's impact and benefits for society, they will be re-elected. But for me, that's the only benefit that they could derive from projects. I think the whole 99% of the benefits of projects has to be for society. I think the projects that impact bigger societies, the countries, those are the most relevant, because you need to think carefully that people feel comfortable. I remember the euro conversion. It impacted everybody in the same way, so we were all part of it. So it's important to think about the benefits. What can I benefit from having a single currency when I travel in Europe? It was not I will make more money. Probably, I don't know, but it will cost a bit more. But what's the benefit I get in exchange? And they did that very well. You're going to be able to travel through Europe, no exchange of currency. The euro will be a strong currency, so will impact the economy. We'll have good companies, we'll have good jobs. So this is what people want to know. This is what leaders should think in advance, is why do we build infrastructure? Why we do making India as a big brand? We need to think about those benefits. And often, like you said, it's not only monetary. It's having better time, more quality time, better time with the family, less time in public transport or transportation. So these are the soft things that we want: more educated people, more schools. So these are the things that matter. And that's, for me, things that should be considered. Nowadays, is very important sustainability. Often you don't see sustainability criteria when you look at the business case. It should be included. Sustainability is not cheap. it will bring your business case down, but in the long term, it will benefit. So some projects that we need in society will not have a profitable benefit return in maybe 10 years. You will only see that later. There are examples, for example, the Sydney Opera House. It was a project that was estimated at 10 million Australian dollars to take just 7 years to build. It took them 14 years, twice as much. It cost not 10 million, it cost 100 million. But that project, when it was done, it delivered so much benefit financially. In 1 year, they paid the overrun in 1 year. But to the country, to Sydney, it was a landmark. So these kind of projects, yeah, it might be costly at first, but then are just landmarks that make people proud. These are important things to consider, not just the budget, which is important because it's our money, but think about the long term and the long benefits.
Absolutely. Which brings me to the question of balance, Antonio. I hear what you say about business case is actually less served compared to the social case. However, in a country like India, where a lot of the project funding is essentially serviced through debts that are probably raised in international money markets, or a development bank like an Asian Development Bank or the World Bank that funds projects, right, in countries like India. And which brings me to the question by Francois Gaston from Paris. He asks, is FDI good for a government project? What are the benefits and disadvantages? So what he's essentially asking about is how can a government like India, which is growing, let's say, in its books, in its balance sheet, how can it balance the commitment it makes to investors on return on investment with the social good? Because obviously there seems to be a conflict there in many cases.
That is a great question, and I don't have like an easy answer, because absolutely there is. I talk kind of from a bit idealistic point of view. Of course, there's the needs, the requirement, the interest that you pay on the debt that you're raising, the different needs that the society needs at the moment. So absolutely, something that is very, very important is where do you get the funding and how do you spend the money and make sure it's well spent. So I would not disregard it. I think it's an important element, but it should not be the only element. What I'm telling is that often, governments, often pushed by the International Monetary Fund or PPPs or foreign investment, are becoming more like an enterprise where it's only about return on investment. So I think that's one of the challenges that we have nowadays in society and when dealing with bigger projects, is finding the right investors, the people who are thinking long term. It is changing. It is changing. You see already a lot of investment funds who are investing in long term, who care about sustainability, who force CEOs and public sector to work on sustainability matters. So I don't disagree that the financial part, it's a challenge and it's a thing to care, but I think we need to go beyond that. And together with more pressure, we can help to make the change.
And we must too, for the sake of the planet,
We must.
for the sake of families and societies. That question was indeed by Fernand Gaston. Pardon, Fernand, c'est pas François Gaston. Moving on, Antonio, I spoke about failure, right? I spoke about the Chandrayaan project, which India is now working on a phase 2 of that, where they're creating local conditions that are close to the moon landing surface, and simulating landing to minimize the risk of failure the next time that they try. So projects fail. Projects inevitably fail. I suppose it's the fact of life. I mean, the Greek Euro project, to a great extent, can be considered as a bit of a patchwork. After the whole Grexit mess that happened, and a five-star movement, I suppose, came up saying, being very Eurosceptic. So there are some shaky things that happen in every big project. Right now, Italy, there is a movement, Hungary and Poland against the euro. But in an abstract way, how to handle project failures is the question from Linda. And she continues to ask, when one government has initiated a project, invested men, money, and material, and has failed, how should the existing government or the new government ought to take over this scenario? What can this whole, in the democratic process of change, how can projects be continued and extracted value out of?
Another great question. But I think when you talk about the project of landing on the moon, even if it was a failure, you were proud of it. Even if we know it cost millions, we were proud of that. Not just Indians, we were all hoping it would land, and we were hoping that it would connect. So I think these are benefits that you cannot measure. And most of the great projects always had failures behind. It's just a continuation of building from learning. So I don't say about project failures. You don't have project failures if you learn from them. If you extract the learnings, if you get to the positive side of what did we learn? How can we do this better? What will we do next time? Then you didn't fail. You're just in a learning process, and you're in an S-curve process where the beginning is always very, very tough. So I think we need to think about failure as something that it will happen inevitably, but we need to learn from that. And if we can anticipate it, we can stop it and turn the ship before, that will be great as well. But failure is not bad in projects. We need to be, of course, be careful on the money side, and that it doesn't leak and is misused or corruption. But in projects investment in projects that fail is a learning opportunities. I always say a project that fails is like a free MBA. But what do we learn? What are we going to learn from that? How can we do it better? Even the best nations in the world, they fail. And they will always talk about the last moment. But landing on the moon, there were lots of project failures behind and before.
When you say great nations fail, American invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan come to mind.
Yeah, it's exactly. So I'm a bit the kind of black or white, but there's always gray zones. But think about failure as something, an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to develop yourself as a country. I think the way you handled in India the project when it failed, I thought it was so mature. We're going to try again. We're going to learn. I think it was so powerful. Then, yeah, we felt disappointed, but we felt proud anyway. So I think also the way you handle failure, that you praise the people, that you thank them, that you consider the efforts done for years, and that we're coming back and stronger. I think that, yes, so valuable that you forget about the money in those cases. So
absolutely,
yeah, important, but it's learn.
Absolutely, Antonio. May I also ask, this is a question coming from me, how to minimize that chances of failure? And I come from this perspective of implementation. Let's say, in my life, I am now being exposed to new methodologies of project implementation. Right, for example, Agile, a way of working. It's something that's coming up, and it seems to be really taking over multiple industries and businesses, and it keeps the project live. And it's kind of seemed to be the middle ground between operations and the project as well. So how can adoption of new methodologies like this actually minimize the risk of failure by keeping the whole project very nimble and reactive to changing circumstances? Question number one. Question number two, how can almost ossified, huge bureaucratic organizations like the Indian government adapt and adopt itself to new methodologies like this?
I absolutely think that we need to adopt agile in public sector, in the sense of the nimbleness, the reducing complexity. And I think one important factor for me, or key one, is focusing on benefits quicker. So I was recently looking into a project in Brussels, Belgium, where they created a hospital, a new state-of-the-art hospital, public sector. And what happened is that the project started in 2016. It was going to be finished in 2020, 4 years construction, not bad. But to my surprise, they decided to open half of the building in 2018. So 2 years before completion, they say, let's have operationally this part. We'll keep building on that part. So we need to plan carefully for safety, for noise, because in this part of the building, we're operating. Babies are being delivered. We're treating people with cancer. And that, for me, I found this is how public sector should think. How can we start delivering benefits? If it's a project of 10 years, how can we show a bit of the benefits in 1 year, in 2 years, in 3 years? So I think that concept of delivering, showing prototypes, benefits are key for public sector to adopt. Definitely, it will make a huge difference when people start seeing benefits from very early in the project and not waiting the 5-10 years.
And my second part of that question was, I know we are approaching the hour, so we'll try and close out really quickly, Antonio. The second part was, how can huge organizations, I find small organizations struggle to get to an agile kind of working, but we're talking about huge bureaucracies who are, it's almost a surprise, it's almost a miracle that they keep running, right? How can they adopt themselves into these new methodologies?
I think the bureaucracy has come when we look at this old way of working, very hierarchical, and you look at banks and they had 17, 20 layers in management, and you look at public sector in ministers and so on. The beauty of working by project is that there's no hierarchy. Project-based agile teams, there's just the boss and the project team. So I think the more we'll see project-based initiatives, that helps to scale down on bureaucracy and making teams more nimble. And I've seen that happening in many organizations where they were fed up of hierarchy and they say, let's remove all the layers. Let's work project-based. Let's have agile teams. And that will have just 2 levels. And anybody can talk to the boss, and you don't need to go through 18 approval signatures to make things happen. So I think once we'll see this embracement of more agile base of work in public sector, you see that, for example, in Ireland. In Ireland, you have that as well, where the projects that the government is launching, they look for civil servants, and they have the experts, and they have some politicians, and they have some bureaucrats, and they all work together to solve one issue in that region, and that's working very, very nice. It's called Project Citizen. So there are a few initiatives, but it will take time because people don't like to be bothered to remove their power. So the leaders are a blocking factor, but it will happen. I think this is a very optimistic view of the future, and we don't need so many layers anymore to be able to deliver change, transformation, value for society. And we need to keep pushing that message. And I think when you look at political parties too, they tend to be much more nimble. If you see Macron in France, there was not such a big hierarchies. It was just one team, and we are all together. And Macron is the voice or the face, but it felt like very nimble team. And I think that people saw that and they like that. So I think political parties which are very bureaucratic and very close and very silo, will need to change too.
Absolutely, and Mr. Kamal Hassan also, who is the leader of Makkal Needi Mayam, the party whose friends we are, he insists a lot on scientific way of governance. Eschewing these fossilized structures of power and scientific fancy also to a great extent. Okay, Antonio, do we have time for 2 quick questions before we start closing out? We do. Okay, great. I want to go to a question by Badri, who's one of us. His question is, how do you address the issue of corruption in public sector projects, especially if you have powers above you? We spoke about the power structure controlling you and steering you in a certain direction. How do you take a strong stance at that point? He continues to ask, what actions do you take? He works in Canary Wharf in London, so I presume he doesn't have that problem. But anyway, in government, that's a very practical problem. So how can one mitigate for that?
I think that's a big issue, and it's so embedded in some societies, and it will be very hard to completely eradicate. But it's all about speaking up. If you hear about something, you need to speak up. I think nowadays with social media, and it's not easy when you're the whistleblower. I had that a couple of times, and it's very uncomfortable, but it's the right thing to do. And it's maybe just talking to your boss, or sometimes the boss of your boss. But it's something that is so coming from individuals. I think the big movement will come from individuals, because politicians are part of it. So they will hardly, unless there's a new party, like in your case, which will try to clean up, because it's more difficult than what it looks like from the outside. Then it's more individuals. I think we've seen kids now speaking up for sustainability matters. Yeah, who's raising the voice? It's not us, the adults. We've been living with people forever with cars and smoke, but the kids say, no, this has to stop. This has to stop. And then stakeholders, shareholders listen to kids, and they say, well, we need to change that. And they're forcing companies to be more sustainable. The same will happen with corruption. It's going to be people who are fed up, and they would say, stop it. And some countries will be easier. Some organizations will manage better. Some countries will never manage. But it's such a cancer. Corruption is the cancer of societies, and it spreads very quickly. So we need to fight to stop it.
Absolutely. Antonio, I must say thank you very, very much for spending time with us. Kannan has a question, and I want to say, firstly, thank you for the last 30, 40 minutes for bearing me and answering the questions that I channeled from others. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Kannan will ask his question, and then we'll take it over into the vote of thanks and then closure. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Satish. Thank you for facilitating the Q&A. Antonio, my question to you is more on the political realm. You're in Europe. You've seen the rise of the right wing. You've seen left-wing governments, and then you talked about Macron, centrism, and all that. Makkal Needi Mayam, Kamal Hassan heads the party, and then he is the first party. Ours is the first party, basically, in India that talks about centrism. From your experience on how projects have been implemented in the right and left-wing governments and conservative governments across Europe and America, how do you see a centrist party executing projects? Is there going to be any difference? Is there going to be anything better? What do you feel?
I feel like there's a strong perception that center and liberal kind of parties will use the professionals much more, the technical people, the experts. I think both sides, either left or right, tend to be more imposing. We know the right way. It has to be like this. They will put their people that think like them, and they're loyal to these causes, to their projects. sometimes taking personal advantages. In Spain, we see that very strongly with the left. They are against corruption, but they buy a super nice villa for them. So these are things that impact a lot. And I do, and my also philosophy is that government should be facilitators, guiding to get the best resources in the countries and outside to build the best thing for society. So I think I do strongly hope and believe that central parties tend to be more professional, less demagogy, trying to do the best they can, and then move on. So that's my perception. I think that's why Macron won so strongly, and you see countries bringing that perspective of we need to lighten up the public sector, the politics, and yeah, facilitate our great country, the great people to do our best.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Like, that aligns with the kind of thinking that Kamal Hassan carries, in that, like, he wants to bring professionals. And one of the things that we are doing as MNM friends is basically to bring in experts like yourself to this kind of events to talk about it so that we can collaborate from the outset and not wait till things kick off and then bring one after the other. So again, thank you very much for your time, Antonio. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Sendar Ramanathan. He's a physiotherapist in London, to conclude this event. Thank you. Sendar? I think you have to unmute him, Satish.
Sindar, you're good to go.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Mr. Antonio, thank you so much for your lovely and very empowering presentation. So like they have to unmute me, I think we need to unmute the society, especially from the corruption, like as you rightly said, like it's a cancer to the society, and that really, like as our bro Kannan said, with our party principles are against corruption. That's one of the primary principles, and the next one primary principle is governance and accountability, and which really is a key and important principle that our leader really kind of is aiming for, and we are definitely supporting it. And it was an excellent presentation, and like you covered wide range of things, like project for wider good, how to kind of have the return on investment for the people, and they're bringing the agile methodology to the public sector, and successful projects like Rwanda. So I think you covered the whole spectrum, and I think it was so simple, straightforward words, and I think it's an amazing presentation. And I start thanking with our friends of MNM team for a lovely kind of bringing such a powerful speaker. You are a keynote speaker for a reason, isn't it? Yeah. So thanks for that, and so special thanks to Satish for facilitating it, and as usual, great job, Satish. Thank you so much, and a special thanks to Sajish and Naveen from our party's technical team, and all the great members, the ideologists and the great citizens of India, France, and Australia to come and join in this lovely presentation. Really looking forward to see you now and again, Mr. Antonio. Thank you so much for everything. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I hope you succeed, and I hope to be able to help you with pleasure. Thank you. I always admire people who want to do things better, and especially in politics and society. So it's been a pleasure, really, and I hope to keep in touch. Don't hesitate.
That's fine. They say gracias de corazón, is it? Or how do you say it?
Gracias de corazón.
Heartfelt thanks. Yeah. Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you, Antonio. Bye.
Bye-bye.